but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this Monday morning.
How are you, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well, and everything is going fine, and we're going to talk about Iran.
Yes.
And the subject of getting rid of the waivers and stirring up the financial market. But before we start, the person that's really pushing that, I guess, might well be Bolton, and his cohort is Pompeo. He's the spokesman for us. But this quote was pretty astounding that he gave at A&M just over the weekend. Yeah. And, you know, as terrible as it was, the applauding has probably annoyed me more than anything else. It almost reminded me sometimes when there was applause during the presidential debates for things that I thought were half decent. But here he gives this statement, and to me it's astounding. And one phrase that I frequently use incorporates this, that traditionally, historically, 10 Commandments and other great religions, don't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. And we know that the CIA even gets involved in killing. But here he is, and sort of giggling over the thing. This to me tells us something is seriously wrong. Already the people have become pretty annoyed with the CIA and our Justice Department over this 2016 election. Yeah. But this is their philosophy. And he went to West Point. But the astounding thing is he's sort of bragging about it. I think it's a big joke. Yeah. I just hope there's another few Americans besides us that get a little bit annoyed with this type of thing. You know, even if we had that quote and read it, it wouldn't have the impact of just listening to that. You know, it's sort of hard to believe that he didn't even have enough sense to realize that that's fairly un-American what he's saying, but it didn't faze him at all because that's how powerful they think they are. They're in charge. And this whole policy of putting on these sanctions and how they're handling Iran, I think it's really a lot of arrogance, and I think his statement there, his quote, demonstrates the arrogance which is so unnecessary and so damaging to our position in this country.
It is very sad to hear the clapping, and it's also really disgusting for a leader, someone that the young people look up to. And I'm sure that the crowd that was watching him, a lot of them were cadets, the Corps of Cadets at A&M, and a lot of these guys are future military guys and future military leaders. And to have someone who is at the highest point of government laughing and joking about this. You know, my son started at A&M, and we went through the orientation. And one of the things they drummed in over and over and over is the policy, the whole philosophy of the school is don't lie, cheat, and steal, and don't tolerate others that do that. And he just turned it on his head and thought it was funny to do this. It's a good thing. And in fact, to add insult to injury, at the end of his absurd statement, he said, it reminds you of the glory of the American experiment. Lying, cheating, and stealing. Talk about unpatriotic.
And I guess we shouldn't be surprised about the type of foreign policy that we're putting up with now. And, you know, we had an agreement which was far from perfect, but we were quite willing to support not getting out of it. And that's the nuclear accord, because it was a move away from nuclear weapons. And it was our government and this administration that got out of that, I guess, a couple of years ago. And this led, to putting on the sanctions. But then to turn this around and say that it's all the Iranians' fault, and then put us in the position, oh, you guys point out the problems of the United States government, but that's our job, that's our country, and that's where we served. You know that we have a right to criticize the policy, but that doesn't mean that if we criticize our policy that we support the other side. You know, this whole thing. But this is really quite out of control. I see our foreign policy as being so arrogant. It just blows my mind to think that we have that much power that we can put on the sanctions. You guys can't trade with Iran, and if you do, you're in big trouble. And, okay, the Iranians aren't behaving. They didn't do what we told them. So now we had given you some waivers and let some of our friends trade and buy the oil that you needed. So no more. So that's what happened this weekend. They said, no more, you can't do it. But I don't know how they can get away with it. What's happened to them? Are they all a bunch of wimps? Yeah. Or they must do it out of their own interest. There must be a financial interest. They say, well, America protects us, so we have to do what they tell us, and they march along. So it's a bad situation. But I think the inevitable consequence of this will be we will have more enemies. The imperial presidency will come down, and that financially we won't be able to afford this. So I think this might sound like tough man's talk and made into a joke, and we're supposed to accept this. But there'll be a day the American people will wake up, especially if this blows up. This could, because the Iranians say, we'll just close the Straits of Hormuz. We're going to let anybody go out. This sort of thing. There will be some retaliation. So this is just a beginning of another segment of our problems with Iran and our problems dealing with Iran.
Yeah,
so this is a mess. But when you hear that these are the guys that are doing it, it makes me wonder, maybe we should have some of those old-fashioned generals back again.
Yeah, exactly.
They might be more reserved. It's like, hey, don't you guys know what you're doing?
Exactly. And, this is the announcement over the weekend that waivers on May 2nd will be completely cut off. And I think there are five countries that use the waivers now to purchase Iranian oil: China, India, Japan, South Korea, and Turkey. They said now from May 2nd, you are not going to purchase a drop of Iranian oil or you're going to get it. And, this is kind of ties in with why we have the title this way, because the justification that they give all the time is that Iran is the #1 terrorism exporting country. Iran is building nuclear missiles and other ballistic missiles, and all of these things that are untrue, that we know are untrue. And even his own CIA, when he was a director, said there's no evidence that they're doing it. The IAEA says they're not doing this stuff. So that brings us back to we lie, we cheat, and we steal. He's openly telling us this, and this is the basis for reestablishing this, taking away the waivers and trying to strangle Iran to death. And I think the rest of the world is not going to have it.
The Saudis, they're our buddies, and they're in a close coalition that's anti-Iranian, including Israel and us and Saudi, and they'll say no sweat. If you need it, we'll pump the oil for us. But that raises an interesting question, because their oil company, Saudi Aramco, they're ready to do an IPO, go on the market, because it's not a gold mine that's going to last forever. So they know that, and they're going to have to get their stock priced. And if there is a conflict over there, and the price of oil goes up, it could make a difference in billions of dollars in the value of their stock when they go out in the market. So they might not have the incentive of making things look so good and there are no problems and oil prices stay down. So they could have an interest in allowing, or even pushing the price of oil up and then have their IPO. But that's sort of a theoretical, thought.
Yeah, and actually what I saw today was that the Saudis were a little bit circumspect in making these promises. They said, well, we're going to see how the sanctions affect before we decide to start pumping to make it up. And we're talking about a significant amount of oil that's going to be off the world market. Iran was pumping 2.5 million barrels a day before we got out of the deal. Now they're still selling 1 million barrels of oil a day. When Americans go to the gas tank, and they're saying, actually I saw somewhere in California they're charging $5 a gallon for gas. So when Americans go to fill up and they start thinking about another 1 million barrels off the world market, plus all the strangling we're doing with Venezuela's oil sales, they're going to start feeling it very, 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 very significantly.
In some ways, it's similar to, but not completely so, with what was happening in the 70s. Because the 60s, we had guns and butter, spent too much money, printed a lot of money. But that money in the 60s had not been discounted in the market, and there was pressure on inflation. So then the Yom Kippur War came along, and we supported Israel on that, and Saudi punished us then. They orchestrated, OPEC, punished us by denying oil. And the interesting thing is how quickly things can change, because before that occurred, oil was $3 a barrel. Before the monetary inflation had been discounted. So when there was a shortage and they pushed things around, oil went to $12 a barrel, 400% increase.
Wow.
And you say, well, that was not a monetary problem. That was just, this. I think it had to do with the incident, but I think it had something to do with the money that we had been printing all along, because prices never went back to $3 a barrel. They kept going up and up and up. And then by 79, we had another crunch when during the time the Ayatollah came back into Iran and the Shah was kicked out. There was another big boost in oil prices. And although they go up and down, I mean, right now, the oil prices have been starting to discount this disruption over here, and it's back up to $66 a barrel. And but that might only be the beginning. That's nothing compared to what happened in the 70s, because there's probably more money out there that we created ever before with all these QEs and sitting around, and no, even the Fed and the government doesn't have control of that. So it's sitting there as going into IPOs and mergers and salaries and all this. But what happens if some of that money leaks out and starts reflecting on this? If it's already pushed it up, people are predicting no time it's going to be $80 a barrel. And long term, I don't think there's any doubt that we're going to be seeing oil over $100 a barrel. But this will just be, the precipitating factor, just an aggravator. So they're dealing with our own financial future too when they're doing this. And if this gets to be a real nuisance, that adds there'll be an emergency military expenditure that they'll need. They'll always come up emergency. The Iranians are fighting back, and we have to invade them, or some crazy thing like that. But our big challenge now, Daniel, is to be able to help our viewers out to tell them or advise them or give them guidance on when Pompeo is telling the truth.
When he's telling the truth.
Today he may have told the truth. They lie, cheat, and steal, and kill.
Yeah. So you think that, just going back to this, because it really is fascinating, I think average Americans are going to start thinking about this. So you think that this could kind of release some pent-up inflation, this move, or has a possibility?
That's the way I look at it, because the inflation is the money supply. The money supply was gigantically expanded with the QEs. Trillions and trillions of dollars. The balance sheet went up from less than $1 trillion up to over $4 trillion. But the big argument is they can't discount it, and they can't get rid of it and get rid of their balance sheet. So what they do is they just keep interest rates at 0% or 1%. So something will happen, an event. It will change. The money is there, and what I find disgusting is was no inflation. What we want is more inflation. We want the CPI to go up 2%, and that is so much nonsense. That's just justifying what they're doing, because some people, don't have enough money to pay rent. The rent's too high. So it's a bunch of baloney about there's no inflation. The inflation, when the money supply there, it's sitting out there. The money was sitting around there from guns and butter in the 60s, and an event like this, released this, and people got nervous, and if people had cash, if it's the kind of thing that's beyond government control. But what did they do? Wage and price controls, and that is exactly what happened in the early 70s. And throughout the 70s, we'll tamp down the price increases by wage and price controls. But no, I think the inflation is there. They can't stop it. It's sort of like the debt is there, and the debt will be liquidated. That can't be stopped. It's just a matter of when and how it's done. It won't be done honestly. If we had a debt and we had to get rid of it, we'd work hard and pay it off. You'd liquidate the debt. The governments never do that, especially if you have the reserve currency. They will liquidate the debt on purpose by calling for prices to go up so the value of the money goes down so that they can liquidate real debt.
Yeah, that sounds frightening. Americans should pay attention. And the thing is, who will suffer? Well, the American people, I think, will suffer if this happens. But even just from strangling Iran, who's going to suffer? Well, Iraq is definitely going to suffer because they do a lot of business with Iran. So here we are, we're kicking them in the face again. But who's going to be happy? And this just shows the folly of the interventionist foreign policy. Who is thrilled right now? Our great enemies, Russia, Venezuela, and even Iran, because the Chinese have said, are you crazy? We're not going to stop buying this oil. What are you going to do? Stop buying our products? You know, you're going to sanction us? The Turks, we've already essentially lost the Turks as an ally through our interventionist policy in Syria. They haven't said for sure they're going to continue, but they've really condemned this. So we're helping our enemies, hurting our friends, or calling it a foreign policy.
There's only one group that's happy, the neocons.
The neocons.
The neocons, and they rationalize and they delude themselves into believing it because, you know, they still argue the case that the Middle Eastern wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, have all been successful.
Yeah,
you know, and Syria, we're doing very well there, and we're moving right along with the North Koreans. We're moving right along with Venezuela, and but they live in a different world. and what really challenges me to think, but a lot of people have talked about this, is, you know, a person's personal IQ sometimes can be very high, but they do all the dumbest things in the world. You can have a high IQ with no judgment whatsoever, especially economic and political judgment. And I'm sure there's people who have good high IQs that are neocons, and that might be a real danger. Yeah. They have the high IQs and they know how to lie to the people and cheat the people because they're smart enough to do it. Yeah. And it's a devastating event that could happen that we're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I saw a good piece by Michael Krieger, who writes at Liberty Blitzkrieg. It was featured on Zero Hedge, and he makes some great points on China. I think this is really the linchpin. He feels that this may be the one thing to really really sink the U.S. economy, to sink the dollar as the world's currency. He talks about, you know, China is the second largest economy in the world. They've got 1 billion people. They've got more than 1 billion people. By the U.S. pulling the waivers and telling China, you will not trade with Iran, you will not buy their oil, the U.S. is essentially telling another sovereign country, a significant sovereign country, dictating what its trade policy should be. And the idea that the Chinese are going to just lay down and let this happen is completely absurd. It's such a poorly thought out policy to do this, and it's just indicative of how the neocons are. They never think through their great ideas.
I think you touched on exactly where they come up short, because I think the Europeans probably will roll over and not stand up. And most of the South American countries aren't going to be very capable of resisting. But there's going to be a time when the New World Order, and that is India and Russia and China coming together, and North Korea will want to be in there, and maybe Brazil, who knows what. They'll come together and there will be an opposition to us. But it won't occur just on political and military means, because all of a sudden, I don't even think they're inclined to. There's no record of the Iranians, taking over the world, except for hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But what they're doing is they're just waiting for this new war or with a new money, and they talk about it all the time, and that will come because this is just an indication of the possibility of that ultimate event that comes crashing down on us. I'm not saying this is it and be ready in 6 months this is going to happen, because they pull it out of the fire, very often, and they restore order, which is a psychological trust or fear that we better listen to the Americans. They have the money or control of the money, and they have the military, and there's a lot of wealth in this country, so we can't take them on now. But ultimately, it will be these events, just like it was in the 70s, that really brought us to our knees in the 70s, and seeing oil going from $3 up to $100 a barrel, because they don't follow these rules. And they're not following. They think that our empire is going to last forever, and the current administration and our president, I think, is able to, stir up his enemies, but he's also able to stir up confidence. This is one of the things going on in the market. because he's a real market producer. You know, he's a promoter, and lower taxes, get rid of regulations, and things did improve in a narrow sense. But it's amazing how much it improved. But the biggest thing now is don't ever raise interest rates. Don't ever let the market tell us that there's something wrong with the interest rate system. So, but the one thing I always remind myself, economic laws are more powerful than the laws of government, and they overwhelm. Just like, the pseudo gold standard of Bretton Woods. It was destined to fail because the market overruled and said, we can't defend the dollar at $35 an ounce, and it crashed, and it's been as high as $1,900, so it's something. Economic laws are very powerful, but governments are unbelievably, competitive in using their force and in trying to prevent it, with legal tender laws and taxes and military and all these things, because the whole goal for us is to maintain our empire, because once it comes unglued and starts cracking away, that's when you see it'll be cascading. There'll be a lot more countries joining against us.
Against us because they're angry. Well, we work hard to try to look at the news, to look at other sources, and to try to give you an unvarnished truth. It's not always pretty. In fact, it's often very ugly. But we do work very hard every day to bring you real news, the Ron Paul Institute and the Ron Paul Liberty Report. So I just want to remind you that this is the last week of April, and it's the last week that we'll be able to offer Dr. Paul's new book, The Individual versus the Collective, as a gift from us to you for joining the Ron Paul Institute, supporting the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Joining at a $50 level, we'll send you this book. If you give us $100 or more, a tax-deductible donation, certainly Dr. Paul will sign the book and send it to you. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you watching the show and sharing it with your friends. These last few weeks, Dr. Paul, we've had a few crises, and our subscriber levels have gone way up. And so we really deeply appreciate you and appreciate all of our subscribers and viewers. Dr. Paul?
Very good. And I, too, want to thank our viewers and our friends for being with us, because we look forward to presenting the case for liberty and peace. But it is not always easy. It's difficult, and we have to stay with it. But when an incident like is happening this weekend with Pompeo and his announcement, as well as the removal of the waivers, which just is looking for trouble, and then to turn it around, it sort of reminds me of how they were twisting things around in the 2016 election, doing something, then blaming the other side. And I think that's what we do, to just go do name calling, and us who have broken away with these nuclear accords with Iran, and then turn around and say it's all the Iranians. They haven't even gone back. There's no evidence whatsoever that they have broken the agreement, and they have done what they said, and the UN inspectors still go in there and turn them around that they are the greatest purveyors of terrorism. It's just not true. And that is the thing that we have to do, is try to sort out the truth from all the fiction that we heard. But now it's going to be more difficult. No, I guess not. I guess we already knew that our government lies to it, and even the CIA would lie to us. We have record of their admission, and we should not ever forget it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.